Hi, Journey family. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. In continuing our series, All Things New, Steve asked me to teach on a different aspect of stewardship. If you remember last week, Steve talked about how stewards are managers and that as stewards of what God has provided or given us, we partner with Him in managing and taking care of God's creation. But steward isn't a word you hear or use very much outside of the church. Now, when I hear it as a comic book fan, I think of someone in particular. You might be able to guess who that is. Steward is, it also means caretaker or manager. I imagine someone that manages a house or an estate. Someone that's like a butler, and perhaps the most famous butler in all of comic books and popular geek culture is Alfred Pennyworth, the steward or caretaker of Bruce Wayne, also known as Batman. Now, if you're not a comic book fan, you still know Batman, and you probably know Alfred. So when I hear the word stewardship, I think of God as Batman, and I think of us, his people, as Alfred. And yes, that might sound a little silly, but think about it. Wayne Manor and the Wayne family fortune all belong to Batman, but Alfred is the one who manages, oversees, arranges, and takes care of it. If Bruce Wayne says, "Get the jet ready," Alfred makes it happen. If Bruce wants a meeting with all the board members of Wayne Enterprises, Alfred makes it happen. Even when Batman gets hurt, injured, wrecks the Batmobile, or damages the Bat-cycle, Alfred sees to it that it is repaired, healed, or properly disposed of. And I think that's what Steve is talking about when he says that we are partnering with God. It all belongs to God, whether we're talking about time, money, or whatever, but God is entrusting us to manage it, to take care of it, and yes, sometimes even to fix it. Now, a few weeks ago, I shared with Steve a Facebook post from an old friend of mine, a professor and a mentor of mine, Bill Doctrum, and he wrote this. He wrote, "It seems to me that it is as important to be a good steward of my pain and suffering and disappointment as it is to be a good steward of my finances, health, education, or whatever else I will give account for." Now, I'll tell you what, I'd never thought of being a good steward of pain, suffering, or disappointment, and I had to ask myself, is pain God-given? Is disappointment God-given? If it's not God-given, then it is certainly God-allowed. Now, I'm going to share a couple of personal stories today that I think help illustrate what I'm trying to teach on. But first, we have to start with Scripture. And today, we'll be in the book of John, chapter 11. The book of John is in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. If you hit Acts or Romans, you've gone too far. So John chapter 11, and we're starting. It says, "A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. And this is the Mary who later poured expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Now her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to the Lord Jesus telling him, 'Lord, your dear friend is very sick.' But when Jesus heard about this, he said, 'Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God so that the Son of God will receive glory for this.'" Verse 5, "So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, 'Let's go back to Judea.'" Verse 11, "Then he said, 'Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up.' The disciples said, 'Lord, if he is sleeping, he'll soon get better.' They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but in fact, Jesus meant that Lazarus had died. So he told the disciples plainly, 'Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him.'" Verse 17, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Now, when Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask." And Jesus told her, he says, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this, Martha?" Verse 27, "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I've always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." Then she returned to Mary, and she called Mary aside from the other mourners and told her, "The teacher, the rabbi, is here, and he wants to see you." So Mary immediately went to him. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. Where have you put him? He asked them. And they told him, Lord, come and see. Verse 35, this is the famous verse. Then Jesus wept. Just 3 words. Verse 36, the people who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him. But some others said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Verse 38, Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with the stone rolled across its entrance. Verse 39, roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested. Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Verse 40, Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside, and then Jesus looked up to heaven and he said this. He says, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in his grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Now, there is a lot to unpack here, and I don't want to keep you for too long, so I'm going to do my best to make it brief and keep it brief. But we're talking about stewardship, being good managers and caretakers of pain, of suffering, of disappointment. And this is certainly a painful, disappointing, frustrating scenario. Now, in verse 14, it says, so he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. Sometimes the negative thing you're facing can be used in the service of and for the glory of God. In verse 27, Martha expresses her faith and her belief. She says, yes, Lord, she told him. I've always believed you're the Messiah, the Son of God, and the one who has come into the world from God. Martha had faith even in her pain and disappointment. She believed that Jesus could have changed the outcome, but she accepted that he didn't, or that he hadn't, at least not yet. As stewards of pain and disappointment, we should always trust and believe that God is still working. Always trust and believe that God is still working. Now in verse 33, it says that when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing and mourning with her, a deep anger welled up within him. Where have you put them? Jesus asked him. Why was Jesus so angry? Now, some translations don't say that Jesus was angry. They say he was deeply moved. In fact, the NIV says that he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, the Greek word used here means earnest admonition, and the word admonish means authoritative counsel or warning. This word is directly related to another Greek word that literally means to snort with anger. So is Jesus angry? Perhaps. In verse 8, we read that Jesus was kept away from Bethany due to threats on his life and on his safety, but maybe he's angry or frustrated at the situation. Have you ever been frustrated or angry at your situation? Now, hold on a minute. If you're like most people, you probably just thought of a situation that you're currently in or a situation in the past. And if you did, if you're like most people, you probably dismissed that situation as not a big deal or dismissed it as, hey, some people have it much worse than I do. Now, whether you did or not, I invite you to write down these 3 words: feel, deal, and heal. That's what we're talking about today, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. The first one is to feel, to allow yourself to feel the feelings of pain, of disappointment, of grief, and of fear. Those feelings are valid, especially right now. This past year with the pandemic and all the drama has been extremely difficult, and people are dealing with it in different ways, some healthy and some not so healthy. I recently read a fascinating article about mental health in this pandemic titled Missed Milestones to Faded Friendships, the Unacknowledged Grief of 2020. In it, a psychologist named Thema Bryant Davis warns against what she called toxic positivity, which is, quote, the impulse to compare yourself or others with those in less fortunate circumstances, end quote. Bryant Davis calls this practice silencing and unhelpful when it comes to processing loss. The article continues stating that the unacknowledged grief can lead to physical consequences like migraines or nausea or a backache. Now, physical symptoms are one thing, but mental ones are another altogether. The article continues, quote, depression, anxiety, and other emotional struggles can have lasting impacts that can be trickier to fix. As people continue to isolate, social safety nets vanish, and people's well-being deteriorates. Now, Jesus makes all things new, but that doesn't mean that your pain, frustration, or the disappointment of the old goes away. There are many misconceptions about the Christian life. Many people assume or even promote or preach that God will fix all of your problems, or that God promises us health and wealth and happiness, but we know that he doesn't. Whether you're confused or unsure what to do, just look at Jesus as your example. And in this chapter, John 11, though Jesus knew what he could do through God, and he knew that this wasn't the end for Lazarus, what did Jesus do? Again, the shortest scripture in the Bible, Jesus wept. Jesus allowed himself to feel the pain. He allowed himself to share in the grief and disappointment of losing a friend that he loved. Now, speaking of friendship, I named this sermon A New Lease on Life for a very specific and a very particular reason. Right now, as I record this, one of my best friends of 20 plus years is in a Denver hospital having received a heart transplant just this past Friday, January 22nd. I want to talk about scary. The very notion of an organ transplant is astounding, and it seems miraculous, but when it's someone you know, and especially when it's the heart, it becomes much, much scarier. All I could imagine was my friend lying there for this 8-hour surgery, just exposed and vulnerable. And then, of course, all the questions roll in. What if the body rejects the organ? Or what if there's an infection? And for the past week, I've been nervous and worried, and I sometimes fell prey to that toxic positivity and even the toxic masculinity. More than once, I told myself to get it together, to man up. You know, you're not the one going through the surgery. Imagine how Richard feels, or imagine how the donor's family must feel. That guy lost his life. But that doesn't make my feelings any less valid. I cried over my friend. I prayed over my friend, and I waited hours to hear that he was okay. And you know what? That's okay. Maybe you don't have something as dramatic as a heart transplant surgery in your life, but your feelings are no less valid either. Maybe you lost a job, or you lost a loved one, or maybe you're just lonely. My son was a senior in high school last year, class of 2020. He missed out on prom, on graduation. That's real pain. That's real disappointment. Weddings have been postponed. Loved ones have had children that we can only see in pictures or through glass. The loneliness is real. The pain is real. The disappointment is real. I want you to take a moment right now and just be silent and feel your emotions. Search your heart and your mind for whatever you might be pushing away or minimizing or getting past, and just allow yourself to feel it. Once you feel it, what's next? What's next is we deal with it. My daughter Naomi is 13 years old now, but when she was a baby, she got a pretty severe infection. We were in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, and this hospital was, it was the worst. I won't say the name here, but if I had a choice between this Orange County hospital or 1, 2, or 3 hours away, I'm taking the car ride. I'll give you an example. Like I said, we're in there for probably 3 days, and it wasn't until the third day, the last day, that anyone offered us a high chair. Here we are in this stupid hospital with the baby and IVs and surgery and all kinds of stuff, trying to feed her, balancing her on our knee, and it felt like the nurses and the doctors could care less. That's a negative, sad, frustrating, disappointing situation, right? We felt it, but what could we do? We had to deal with it. Jenny and I fought through it with sleepless nights, a crying baby, of course, the fear of surgery, and our family helped out. And after a little while, we were finally able to get free of that place. And of course, we filed a complaint afterward, but something else happened. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. Here's another story. Back in 2005, one of my best friends, Mike, he died in a motorcycle accident. Grief? Yes. Sadness, pain, frustration? Yes, I felt it, but how did I deal with it? Well, in this case, I turned back to my faith. I was living a very different life. I was nowhere near the Christian lifestyle, and I didn't even own a Bible. Of course, there's no apps or no iPhones, so I had to go to Borders Books, if you remember that, and buy a Bible. I went to church with my mom, and I basically went back to God. So how did I deal with it? I dealt with it through faith and through the church. How should you deal with it? However you need to. Meditation, yoga, learn a musical instrument, play video games, listen to music, work out, take up running. Whatever you do, get a counselor, have therapy. Don't ignore it, and don't try to go it alone. Jesus was surrounded by people and they grieved their loss together. In verse 34, he says, "Where have you put him? Where have you put Lazarus?" he asked him. And they told him, "Lord, come and see." And when Jesus saw, he wept. The people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him." He wept. He felt that. And if you can't be around other people because of COVID, then find other ways to connect, whether it's the telephone or Zoom or outdoor seating, whatever it is, find an outlet for your feelings. But to deal with the situation is to make the most of a bad situation. We feel, we deal, and then we heal. Now, my wife Jenny is a nurse. Probably most of you knew that, but do you know why she's a nurse? It's because of that horrible hospital stay with Naomi. I mean, after receiving terrible subpar care, Jenny felt like, hey, I can do a better job than that. And from that horrible, painful, disappointing experience, her new career, a new job was born. When my buddy Mike died, it shook me to the core, but it also brought me back to the church. And that brought me into ministry. And that brought me right here to you today. Mr. Rogers has a quote. He says that when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." I have a similar saying. I say, look for the ripples. The ripples. What do I mean by the ripples? It's finding the good in a bad situation. See, a death in the family or a big traumatic event is like a huge stone or a brick thrown into an otherwise still body of water. And that big splash upsets the surface of the water, makes a big noise, and of course, basically wreaks havoc on life as we know it, okay? But what happens after that brick or that stone disappears below the surface is there are ripples. From the place where the stone created upheaval and chaos come ripples that travel out very far, sometimes to the edge of the lake or all the way to the edge of the pond. My friend Mike's death on that motorcycle was a stone. Me becoming a pastor is one of the ripples. Naomi in the hospital was a stone. Jenny becoming a nurse is one of the ripples. No matter what pain or hardship you're enduring, there will always be some healing, and you might not see it yet, but they're there. And I believe that God is in the ripples. And how do I know that? Because the ripples glorify God. Think about it. In verse 15, Jesus says he was glad that he wasn't there when Lazarus died. And he said when he told him to roll the stone aside and people weren't sure, he knew they were feeling the pain, they were dealing with it, but they didn't see the ripples. You see, God always hears you. In John 11, the miraculous turnaround is great for Lazarus, sure, great for Mary, Martha, and their friends, but so many of us are waiting for our Lazarus moment and it never comes. I see so many posts on social media asking for prayer for a loved one that's in the ICU or a car accident or a bike accident. Heal it, Lord. Take it away. And people treat it like a vending machine. You put in the prayer, you press the button for miraculous healing or a financial windfall, and God just delivers what you want. But that's not how it works, is it? God always answers prayer, but sometimes the answer is no. If we trust God, we must be just as happy with the no as we are with the yes, because we trust that God knows best and we trust that he has our best interest at heart. Like I said before, just because Jesus makes all things new, that doesn't mean that your pain, your frustration, or your disappointment of the old goes away. However, we can trust that there's a plan and that God will be glorified as a result. Rick Warren, he wrote in The Purpose-Driven Life, quote, "Jesus did not die on the cross just so that we could live comfortable, well-adjusted lives. His purpose is far deeper. He wants to make us like himself before he takes us to heaven," end quote. 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7 puts it this way, says, "So be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world." Again, I'm going to say it one more time. God always answers prayer, but sometimes the answer is no. People often ask me and other pastors, of course, why God would allow bad things to happen to good people, and I always tell them that isn't God's desire, it's ours. This is a fallen world filled with sickness and pain and suffering and disease and famine and murder, but it's also full of beauty and love and kindness and laughter and hope. Now, we want all the good things, of course, and none of the bad, except both the bad and the good come from the same place. It comes from us. There isn't famine because the planet doesn't produce enough food to feed us. Famine exists because we are too sinful, because of fear and greed and pride, and we lack the empathy and the selflessness to fix it. To ask God to remove the negative and to leave the positive is to ask him to remove free will, and we don't want that. None of us want to serve God as mindless automatons with no other choice. So God allows these things to happen because he gave us free will and choice. And it's up to us how we live it, and for the most part, we're doing a pretty terrible job, which is why God sent us a solution. Now, the solution isn't a right now solution, but an eternal solution. And of course, that solution is Jesus. God doesn't promise you happiness or health or fairness, but he does promise you that this is not the end. When the rock of no hits, look for the ripples of yes. Richard has a new lease on life. Before this surgery, his heart was operating at a 16% efficiency. Now he's almost at 100%. But he's gone through all the stages. He felt the pain, the hurt, and the fear, and the worry of being on the transplant list for years. He dealt with it with the medication. He had a pacemaker, a defibrillator installed. And he finally got the heart, the surgery, the call for the heart and the surgery. And of course, now he's healing. But somewhere there's a family that just started this process. There's a family that's grieving. They're currently feeling. Yes, we have to wait on the ripples of yes, but you don't have to wait alone because God understands what you're going through, and God will place people and things in your life to help you overcome. Don't deny your pain. It is God-given, or at the very least, God allowed in this fallen world. But we must be good stewards and managers of our pain and our disappointment because your trials and your tribulations, your disappointments are designed to bring you a better understanding of who God is and what he does and bring you closer to him. As we turn to Jesus, our eternal solution, right now in communion, Steve is going to lead us through communion and close in prayer. But I want you to think about what I said. Feel, deal, and heal. Thank you for allowing me to share what God has put on my heart. God bless you. Hey, everyone. I wanted to record this hopefully brief update because there's more to this sermon. I recorded the sermon you just watched Thursday night the 28th. And I'm recording this Saturday morning, the 30th. The reason why I'm recording this is because something interesting, I guess, happened. Talking to my wife, Jenny, she kind of helped me see it. And I felt like I needed to share it. So I'm sharing it. I talked about my friend Richard. You just watched the sermon, so of course you know he had this heart surgery. Everything seemed to be going well. It seemed that we were in the joy phase. We were in the healing phase of the feel, deal, heal that I thought was pretty clever. But, I recorded that Thursday night, and then Friday morning, Richard's partner, we'll call her, called me and told me that he had taken a turn for the worst. And the things are worse, I guess, worst. And things weren't looking so good. And after multiple surgeries and kidney failure and dialysis and all kinds of issues, we lost him. So that was Friday. So I went from the heel right back to the feel. And now, smack dab in the deal. And it's weird because I have to take my own advice. I have to trust God and believe that there's a plan and recognize that pain and suffering and grief is, if not God-given, it is God-allowed. And it's an opportunity to trust him, to grow closer to him, even when it doesn't make sense to us. And so I'm preaching to myself, as Jenny put it. And now I gotta look for the ripples.